Hello and welcome to The Canadian Wants to Know. My name is George.
And my name is Heinrich, and I have this smiley today that we both, at least I smile a little bit more.
Yes, that's a good idea. We need to have a little bit more positivity in our lives. And today we're going to talk about unemployment, which is not something that we can really smile about, but we have some ideas, or at least Heinrich has some ideas so that we can mitigate it, or what the state can do to mitigate it and lower unemployment and also increase wages in our society. Also, let's go. Okay, so do you have what's your first proposal to lower unemployment?
Yes, my first proposal is that, or what I would like to stress is that a minimum wage is for a society important. We introduced the minimum wage in Germany in 2015. That was quite late. Maybe we talk later why we introduced it quite late. And there were a lot of discussions whether there's a risk that a minimum wage would cause unemployment. But I think that a minimum wage lowers unemployment because we shouldn't forget that labor costs are on the one side costs for the employer, but on the other side, when you have more money, as somebody of the lower classes, then you can consume more. When you have not so much money, then you would spend all the additional money you will get. So that means when we have a certain level of minimum wages and we have an increase of the general level of wages, then we will have a higher demand. That's good for the economy as a whole and for the concrete persons of the lower wage classes.
Okay, so if we increase minimum wage, this will increase demand, which will lead companies to hire more people, right?
Yes,
Because
that's the idea.
more people are buying things, so I need to hire more people to build these things. Are there some drawbacks, some negative aspects to increasing the minimum wage?
You can say that it's negative, but I would say it's a challenge.
Okay.
Because sure, when you have a company with a lot of people who get a low wage and then you have to pay a higher minimum wage, then you as an employer has the challenge to manage these higher wages. And there are two consequences. The most negative consequences that you have to shut down your company because the labor costs are too high. But I think the challenge is to improve the productivity of the company. To give an example, when we harvest cucumbers, today we need a lot of people to do this job. But when we have higher wages, a consequence could be that the farmers think about machines who are able to harvest the cucumbers. So consequently they need less stuff. But I would say that's a good consequence. These people get higher wages. We have new machines, so we can have also in the future cheap cucumbers. And if the staff get higher wages, then they can buy a lot of things and new companies will emerge.
Okay. So it's not exactly a negative, but it is a challenge for companies.
It is a challenge, and we should have in mind that cheap wages have a negative influence, negative impact on the productivity of a society. There is no pressure to hire the productivity of a society.
Okay, so what is your second proposal for us?
My second proposal is let's talk about the public sector and the wages of the public sector. There are two important issues. One issue is I think we all learned that the public sector is inefficient. There work lazy people. it's not productive, and we have everything to privatize. I read that in the US, even the prisons are privatized. I think it's crazy, but the background is the ideology that the market
is the best instrument.
The market is the best instrument, and I think we should think about the question when the market is a better instrument and when the state is a better instrument. And what we can learn from the past is that the state was more important for modern technologies than we know. For example, Steve Jobs, he was a genius businessman and inventor, but he used the technologies the state develops. So the state did the so-called basic research in the past. Today, I think the state invests today not enough. He should invest more to develop new technologies. In the past, the state did it, and for example, Steve Jobs had some advantages of this basic research, and he was able to create fantastic products. But we should have in mind both. So, first of all, the public sector is important for high risky basic research. The risk is quite high, and it's difficult to find so-called risk investors. They always come later. The first research is the first of the state. There's a second issue. The state can be a price setter. If the state increases the wages in its sector, then the private sector has to follow, because I think it's very often it's true that when you have a job in the public sector, maybe it could be more relaxed, or your job is safe, so you are willing to accept lower wages. And when you want to have higher wages, then you have to go to the private sector. And if the public sector increases its wages, then the private sector has to follow. If the private sector doesn't follow, then the people would all go to the public sector. My third proposal is that we re-strengthen the so-called collective labor agreements. That means in a certain sector we have for all the companies certain general rules, labor time, wages, and so on. And this was, after the Second World War, I would say for a long period of time it was normal in a lot of countries in this world. And these institutions were weakened in the 19th of the last century, because the argument of the side of the employers was that that these kind of agreements, these kind of general agreements would cause too high labor costs. But we have to go back to these kinds of agreements, because maybe for some companies these costs are too high, but it's a challenge for this company. These companies have to increase their productivity. And if they are not able to achieve the high productivity, then they have a problem. But we need this pressure, and wages can help to increase the pressure that we increase our productivity. High wages have to lead to a higher productivity. Then we have a better wealth in our company.
Okay, so can you give us one final takeaway? What should the audience remember?
Yes, the takeaway is low wages are a poison for a country, because we need high wages. High wages lead to a higher productivity in a society, and the productivity of a society is the reason why we have high wealth. material wealth. Yes, that's
so
it.
we want higher wages because that will lead to productivity. And like we said in a previous video, a higher productivity will also be a way to limit an inflation.
Yes.
So there are many benefits to increasing productivity in a
Yes.
country.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you, Heinrich.
Thank
We
you
have
very much.
one final question for the audience, and this question is, do you think the minimum wage in your country should increase? So you can leave the answer in the comments section below. Thank you for your attention. Also, bis nächstes Mal.
Ciao.